Hello everyone, welcome to our videos, and today what we're going to be doing is basically some tips and tricks in inheritance and coordination and response. Before we even start, so I am basically a biology expert at Bryt. Bryt is a learning platform that allows you to learn O-level content for 5 subjects, which are math, economics, math, economics, bio, math, accounts, and ad math. And we offer videos, content videos, bite-sized videos, revision guides, and we offer a question platform called Clear Your Doubts, where you can ask questions and understand your doubts. So today what we're going to be doing is basically a video on inheritance and coordination response and try to tackle some of your problems that in inheritance. So let's start off with inheritance first. And before you even start off with inheritance questions, there are 5 or 6 things that you need to remember to actually make sure that you do your inheritance questions well. And first of them is that most organisms that we talk about when we're talking about inheritance are reproducing sexually. So that means they have to produce gametes. And when we know when we're producing gametes, gamete only has half the number of chromosomes as the parent cell. So it only has half the copies of each gene as well. So they only have one copy of each gene instead of two. So because they have only one copy of each gene, we don't really know what copy they may have depending on the genotype and the phenotype of the organism. So we're gonna actually tackle like how do we actually interpret what inheritance patterns are telling us and how do we solve these questions. So moving forward, we know that genes are found on chromosomes, and because they are chromosomes and each gamete has only one copy of each chromosome, we can say that it also has only one copy of each gene instead of two, while a diploid organism or a normal cell has 2 copies of each gene. So hence, because each gamete has only one copy, fusion of gametes from two different individuals leads to very interesting combinations of different alleles that allow us to see inheritance patterns and allow us to predict genotypes and phenotypes. So when you keep all of these in mind, it becomes very easy to know that how to solve inheritance questions. So keep these 5 things in your mind and we'll start move forward. That sexually reproducing organisms go through meiosis to produce gametes, and because they're producing gametes, they only have one copy of each gene. And because they only have one copy of each gene, we'll see how that plays out when we're doing inheritance. So before we even tackle the inheritance questions, we need to talk about the nature of these alleles and the nature of these genes, which are that some genes or some alleles are actually what you call dominant in nature. That means whether they are present in a pair solely or whether they are present in a heterozygous pair or a homozygous pair, they will express their effect. Meaning, regardless of whether there's another allele, the dominant alleles will always show their effect in the physical characteristic that the organism has, while a recessive allele will only show its effect when it is present in a homozygous recessive state, or when both of the alleles are same and both of the alleles or both copies of the gene are basically the same and recessive. That's only when a recessive characteristic will be shown, and we shall see all of that when we are doing our crosses. And last is what you call codominant. Codominant is very interesting because in this, no allele is either dominant or recessive to this next one. Instead, when they are present both together, they both will tend to show their effects. And we see that generally in blood groups, and when we do the cross for blood groups, you will see that as well. So before we even go on, let's start with our cross. So what I'm going to show as a cross is basically of a pea color. Basically, the pea that we see in vegetables, it comes in either yellow or green. The yellow color is dominant and is expressed by the allele capital Y, and the green color is recessive and expressed by the allele small y. So what I've taken here are two purebred parents, or two parents that are homozygous for each allele. So this parent will have a yellow pea color and this parent will have a green pea color, and they are basically homozygous. This is what I will call as homozygous dominant, and this is what I will call as homozygous recessive. So now we talked about how these organisms will form gametes. So when they form gametes, they will get one copy of each allele. So in this case, you can see here how this yellow gets divided, the two capital Y's get divided into two gametes here. So this is one gamete and this is another gamete. And now we talked about how gametes will form again. So again, this cell will form these two gametes, both with having one copy of the gene for pea color, capital Y, and small y. Now the thing is, when we do a cross, they will mate. These pea that pea plant that is forming yellow peas will mate with the plant that is forming green peas. Now the thing is, there's equal probability of each gamete from one plant to fuse with each gamete of another plant. That means that this means that this gamete can mate with this gamete, or it can mate with this, it can fuse with this gamete. And same case here, this gamete can fuse with this gamete, or it can fuse with this gamete. And you can see now that all of these are heterozygous in nature. That means both of the alleles that are present in all of these cells are different. But all of these P's that are now formed will be yellow in color. Why? Because the yellow trait is dominant, and because it is dominant, whether it is present in a homozygous dominant state, which is this, or whether it is present in a heterozygous state, it will always be present, it will always be shown. So all of these P's are yellow in color. So the phenotype of these P's is yellow, while the genotype is heterozygous. Now, if I were to do another cross, actually moving before that, this is very tedious to do. This tree diagram is very tedious to do. So what I've done is shown you a shortcut, which is what you call a Punnett square or a Punnett square. And this is basically shown here. So what I can do is I can make a grid-like pattern, and I can write the first parent on this horizontal row, the second parent on this vertical row, and I can use these boxes to fuse the gametes. So 1y here, 1y here, y here, y here, y here, and y here, and vice versa here. So you can see we get the same result in a Punnett square as we got into this tree diagram, but a Punnett square or Punnett square is much easier to do. And because it is much easier to do, people actually prefer to use a Punnett square because A, it saves time, and B, it's much more easier to see how the gametes will fuse. So now let's look at a worked example, and let's work on this example together. So now what I've done here is actually I've taken two of the same P's from the offspring and tried to do a cross between them. I've shown you what the gametes will be formed. Now you can see that here capital Y goes in one gamete and small y goes in the other. Same case here, capital Y goes in another, small y goes in another. So that's how the gametes are formed, because each gamete is basically produced through meiosis, so it can only have one copy. So each gamete will get one copy. And now what I've shown you here is a Punnett square where I've written the first parent on top, and I've written the second parent here. And now I just have to fuse the gametes. So now we get a capital Y, a capital Y, a capital Y, small y, a small y and capital Y, and a small y and small y. So if I look at the ratios, what I've seen is basically I've gotten a homozygous dominant, I've got two heterozygous, and I've got one homozygous recessive. So our ratio would be 1:2:1 of homozygous dominant, heterozygous, and homozygous recessive. So that is your what you call your genotypic ratio. So this is your genotypic ratio, which is basic. But if we talk about the phenotypic ratio, or basically what phenotype means is basically the physical characteristic, we know that this will be yellow, this will also be yellow, this will also be yellow, and this would be green. And since this is the ratio, so we can say the ratio is 3:1 of yellow is to green. So this is basically how you do a cross. Now you can do different types of crosses which lead to different types of ratios. For example, sometimes what you do is when you're crossing with a homozygous recessive, like we did in the first plant, and I just change this part to, let's say, small y, thus the entire cross will eventually change, and you can check out that possibility as well. So to know more about crosses and how it works and what different types of crosses we do have, you can actually check out our videos on Bryt about test cross, codominant crosses, and monohybrid crosses, and you will know the different types of crosses that we encounter in biology O levels. And from there, let's go on to a different type of cross which we call a codominant cross. The thing is, we've been talking about genes for a very long time in this video about how we have dominant alleles and recessive alleles, but that's not the case for all the alleles that you find. Some alleles are what you know as codominant, and codominant means that they both will show their effects when present together. And the biggest example for that is our blood groups. So blood groups has basically three alleles. You have the allele for blood group A, you have the allele for blood group B, and you have the allele for blood group O. And because you have these three alleles, the nature of these alleles is very interesting because A and B are neither dominant nor recessive to each other, but they both are dominant to O, which means if A is present in the presence of O, or either B is present in the presence of O allele, then the O allele will be masked and the blood type would be A or B. But if both of these are present, if A and B are present in each other's presence, then they both will be expressed and you will get a blood type of AB. The only time you can get a blood type of O is basically when you have both of the O alleles. So what I've shown you here, what I'm going to show you right now in this cross is basically two parents that are heterozygous. One has a blood type A and one has a blood type B. So now that should give you a hint that if I've given you a A blood type and a B blood type and I've said that they're heterozygous, that means the other allele that they have is the allele of O. And this is what I've shown you. So this person has blood type A. This person has blood type B. And they both have the O allele in them. So when we form the gametes here, you can say one gamete will get IA, the other will get IO, this will get IB, this will get IO. So these are the two alleles, and now we can draw a Punnett square and you will see how we get all four different blood types because of this codominant nature from these gametes. So let's do the cross together. Here you have IA, IB, this will be IB from this, and IO or small I, this can be represented as small I as well. This will be IA, IO, IO, and IO. So now if you map the blood types, you can see it has all four blood types. This will be blood group AB, this will be blood group B, this will be blood group O, and this will be blood group A. And all of these four blood types are there. You can see that even the genotypic ratio changes and the phenotypic ratio also changes. We get a ratio of 1:1:1, which is basically one blood type AB, one blood type B, one blood type A, one blood type O, and even the genotypes of all four of these individuals will be different. So this is how you can tackle blood type questions. You just have to be very careful what the question is telling you in terms of the genotype. If they say they're heterozygous and the blood type is A or B, then you can be very sure that then the second allele in that heterozygous pair is O, not A or B. Because if A or B is present along with another A or B, then you will get blood type AB. So that's how you do codominant crosses. So that's what it is. So these are the basic two main types of crosses that you will tackle in inheritance. And as long as you can remember that you have to separate the alleles in your gametes and then fuse each allele of each individual to the allele of the next individual, you will get very accurate results. That is how you do inheritance crosses. Well, the second topic that we're going to be tackling in this video is basically coordination and response. So before we dive into coordination and response, again, let's see what are the areas that we need to tackle when we are talking about coordination and response, which are basically the type of neurons that are present in your body, the different areas of the brain and what do they control, because the reflex arc, your hormones, and the different types of hormones that basic hormones that you should have an idea about. So before you even go into types of neurons, let's just look at our brain because that is very important. So the brain has basically five main regions, which is your cerebrum, your hypothalamus, your pituitary gland, your cerebellum, and your medulla. So these are your five basic ideas of the brain that you need, and they all control different aspects of our body. So for example, the cerebrum, which is the large gray matter area that you see that you generally recognize as the main brain, is basically the conscious part of your brain. That means anything that you do consciously, whether it's speaking, talking, walking, listening, exercising, moving your voluntary muscles, they are all under the control of your cerebrum. So making your opinions, your judgments, everything that comes under the control of the cerebrum. This is where you think from. Second is basically your hypothalamus, and your hypothalamus is basically involved in making sure the internal environment of your body or the internal homeostasis of your body stays balanced. So it is talking about the internal balance of the body that the body needs to maintain. That's under the control of the hypothalamus, which is this part, right, which is right behind what you know as the pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland is very important because it is a master gland of the body. And why do we call it the master gland of the body? Because it does two things. Number one, it releases hormones as well, but it also directs other organs in your body to release hormones and control or navigate the internal conditions of your body to respond to certain environmental conditions. That's why it is known as the pituitary gland. It detects a lot of stimuli and then is able to produce a response and trigger the right organs to produce a response. That's why it is known as the master gland of the body. Second, lastly, you have your cerebellum, which is basically your hindbrain, also known as your hindbrain, and this basically maintains internal balance that allows you to, walk. It maintains your posture. It makes sure that you walk. It also has the control of your heartbeat. So a lot of unconscious processes, such as maintaining your balance, making sure that your heart's beating, making sure the heartbeat is appropriate to what you want it to be. All of these unconscious processes are under the control of your cerebellum. So that's the brain region that is important. And lastly, you have the medulla. And the medulla has a very basic function, which is basically coordinating the responses from the spinal cord that the brain receives. So it basically sends messages from the spinal cord to the brain and sends messages from the brain to the spinal cord and coordinates the responses from that. So that is basically your areas of the brain. So let's move forward with types of neurons. So types of neurons are basically three types of neurons. You have your sensory receptor neurons, your intermediate relay neurons, and your motor or effector neurons. So sensory neurons have a very basic function. They are responsible for bringing responses from your environmental or stimuli or from your receptors of your stimuli to your brain or spinal cord. Secondly is your motor neurons, which basically sends the message from your brain or spinal cord to the effector muscles that need to bring about the appropriate response. Okay. Lastly, you have your relay neuron, which is basically coordinates responses from your sensory neurons to your effector neurons. Okay. So that is basically your different types of neurons. So these neurons are basically found at where your muscles are or where your receptors are. For example, if your fingertips can respond to touch because it has sensory neurons that will be sending the message from your fingertips to your brain. If you can move your fingers, you can move your muscles because there are motor neurons that can bringing your responses from the brain or spinal cord, and then you are allowed to or you are able to move your muscles. Which brings us to the next topic, which is basically reflex arcs. And reflex arcs is actually a very cool mechanism because it actually saves you from a lot of things without you even thinking about it. So reflex arcs are basically automatic responses to external stimuli, such as that especially are involved in you entering into dangerous situations, such as getting hit or touching something hot. All of these are basically involuntary responses so that you do not end up hurting yourself. For example, if you touch something hot, you immediately remove your hand. The speed at which you remove your hand is actually faster than your brain telling you to remove your hand. That is because it is a reflex response. And I've shown you a diagram here which shows that how a reflex response works. For example, I've shown you here basically how a delay happens. So I've shown you like your receptor is the eye, it sees a glass. And your instinct is to pick it up because you want to drink water. So your reflex arc will your sensory neuron will just send the response to your spine, and your spine will automatically send a response to your motor neuron to pick up the glass. In case you have a second thought, there is a delay, and the reason there is a delay is because the message has to be sent to the brain, and then a decision-making process sends an impulse back. So this causes a delay, and this delay can be the difference between you burning your finger if you're touching something hot or not burning your finger. So that's why when you touch something hot, it is instinctual for you to actually drop it back, because what it does is your spinal cord just sends a message to remove your hand instantly before the burn can settle on your skin. One other cool one is basically the knee-jerk reaction, which I've shown you in this diagram and the next one, because this is something completely involuntary. Even if you try to control it, you will not be able to control it because it is so disconnected from all other reflex arcs, and it is the shortest reflex arc that is there. It is so involuntary that doctors actually use it to check if your body is reacting normally. So what happens is you can strike a small hammer on the top of your knee, and that will send a message from the sensory neuron to the spinal cord. And right as it sends a message that something has been hit, your spinal cord will send a message back through a motor neuron and your knee will jerk up. It is just supremely automatic. You will not even realize it that your leg has jerked up, even if you try to stop it. And don't try this at home, or if you want to try that, be very careful. But you will see that even if you try to stop it, you won't be able to stop it. And that's the beauty of reflex arcs. So the thing is, this is all how nerves work. It's very quick, it's small, narrow impulses sent for very specific movements. But there's an other entire messaging system in the human body, which is basically hormones. Hormones are much slower acting. These are basically chemicals that are released into the blood that bring about a slower but much more broad change in your body composition to bring internal environment back, or to prepare you for something, or prepare you for a stressful situation, or prepare you for a change in environment that you need to be aware of. So hormones are basically chemical signals, and they are wide acting with very broad effects. So three hormones that you need to be careful of are basically adrenaline, which is used in your fight or flight responses. We'll talk about the fight and flight response in a bit, and your insulin and your glucagon. So before you even go into insulin and glucagon, let's first talk about adrenaline. What's a flight and fight response? So adrenaline is actually released when you encounter stressful situations where you could either be in danger, or you could be facing a threat, or you're just under stress. When that happens, your body tends to release adrenaline to make you more alert. And how does adrenaline actually help you make you more alert? Is number one, it increases your heartbeat. So that when your heart is beating faster, you have more blood in your system, so you're more aware. It increases your metabolic rate, so more energy is available for you to use. It decreases your appetite, so you're more focused. And it dilates your blood vessels, so more blood is available for your muscles so that they can move and do movements faster and contract faster, so that you are able to perform certain actions. So it dilates your blood vessels for availability of more blood. So you can see how these actions are. It increases your heart rate, so your blood pressure increases, more blood is available to the muscles. Your blood vessels are dilated, so more blood is again available to your muscles. It can hold a much larger volume of blood. You decrease your appetite, increase your focus, and increase your metabolic rate, so more energy can be produced. So that allows. Okay, so before we move forward, if you have any doubts about any of this what we're talking about, you can actually come to our website and our app, where we have a section called Clear Your Doubts. You can mention your questions, and some of us, our correspondents, will get back to you shortly and reply with the appropriate answers that you are looking for. We also have basically quizzes and other revision notes for you to prepare for your exams, so that you are able to understand and do as best as you can in your papers. Apart from that, we have videos. For example, we have the entire coordination response videos uploaded for biology, so that if anything that's not making sense at the moment, you can check out our videos that will deal with reflex arcs in more detail. That's areas of the brain, all the hormones that you need to take care of in your papers. All of that will be dealt in our video, so do check them out. Do check out our Clear Your Doubts question. If you have any questions, do ask them there. And if you are just one of those students who haven't really prepared, we have last minute revision notes that allow you to gain a very quick perspective on how to best solve your papers. So before I end this video and we go on to questions, let's just really quickly talk about insulin and glucagon, which are basically responsible for making sure that your blood glucose stays normal. Insulin are released by beta cells of your pancreas. They lower your blood sugar if your blood sugar is high, and they lower it by telling the liver to absorb more glucose and convert it to glycogen. So when your liver absorbs more glucose, less glucose is now in the blood, and your blood glucose goes back to normal. Opposite works in the case of glucagon. What happens is alpha cells of the pancreas release glucagon, and they increase your blood sugar. So if your blood sugar is low, it is detected, and then the pancreas are told to release glucagon. Glucagon will allow the liver to release more glucose into the blood, so your blood glucose goes back to normal. So those are basically the main hormones that you need to know about. This will be it. I will see you very soon. Goodbye.